Hi, this is Lucy Arnaz. You're listening to TV Confidential.
Ed Robertson, welcoming you to this week's edition of TV Confidential, radio talk show about television. And we'll welcome back Robert Crane and Christopher Fryer in our second hour. Robert Crane and Christopher Fryer, co-authors of several books on movies and television, including Things I Said But Probably Shouldn't Have, the memoir of Bruce Dern, and Jack Nicholson, The Early Years, the first and only authorized biography of Oscar winner Jack Nicholson. Bob and Chris's latest book, Three-Cornered Circle, is an adaptation of their book, Crane, Sex, Celebrity, and My Father's Unsolved Murder, that depicts the period in Bob's life when he lands the job of a lifetime as publicist and right-hand man to comedian John Candy, while also balancing the shocking news that his wife at the time, landscape designer Kari Hildebrand, is diagnosed with cancer. It's a story of love, laughter, and loss that we'll tell you more about when Robert Crane and Christopher Fryer join us in our second hour. We hope you stay tuned for that in the meantime. And speaking of Robert Crane, we'll begin our first hour by welcoming Oscar-nominated and Annie Award-winning animator Bill Kroyer. Bill received his Oscar nomination in 1988 for his short film Technological Threat. Technological Threat, the first film to combine 2D and 3D animated characters. Bill also directed FernGully, The Last Rainforest, as well as many commercials and many credit sequences for animated feature films. Plus, he was one of the main animators for the CGI sequences in Tron. Tron, the sci-fi movie from 1982 starring Jeff Bridges that proved to be one of the game changers in the world of film animation. Bill's memoir, Mr. In-Between, not only is the story of how he came to Hollywood on a wing and a prayer, only to end up as a key figure in the technical revolution of animation's second age, but is a primer on the fundamental principles of animation as explained by an artist. Bill Kroyer's appearance on our program this week is courtesy of Robert Crane. We'll tell you where you can find Mr. In-Between in just a second. In the meantime, we began our conversation by telling Bill, the cool thing about your book is it's a history written by someone who was there, a professional animator, and it's written from an artist's point of view. Occasionally, you go into how-tos of what certain technical terms are, but foremost, it's your story, and you bring to life a lot of legends in the world of animation, and people who made the industry possible when you first came to Hollywood in 74, 75, as well as the people like John Lasseter and Brad Bird, who, along with you, helped change the industry to what we know it as today.
You know, it was an amazingly fortuitous time for me, because I arrived in 1975 when, as I say in the book, nothing had changed since 1915. You know, an animator who was animating on an animation disc using paper, on punched paper on an animation disc, flipping the paper, drawing with a pencil, was doing that in 1915. In 1975, actually all the way up to 1985 with Oliver and Company, that had not changed. An animator who worked on Gertie the Dinosaur or Felix the Cat could have sat down and worked on Oliver and Company and not had 1 day of training, not an hour of training. It's exactly the same technology. 10 years later to the day when Toy Story opened, the industry completely flipped. And it went from 80 years of no change to 10 years of total change. And since Toy Story, of course, we all know that CG has kind of dominated the industry. So that was the thing, was I was able to come into the industry and experience exactly what the old guys had done. As a matter of fact, a lot of the old guys were still there. Grim Natwick, the 9 Old Men, Chuck Jones, Fritz Frayling, all the famous guys who, from the Warner Brothers studios and the MGM studios and the Disney studios, were all still there and still available to talk to. And that was quite remarkable. It's almost impossible to think of another art form in the history of the world where the people that invented the art form were still around when the art form went through a total renaissance. And that's what happened, coincidentally, with my timing and my career.
In a way, Chuck Jones is responsible for you coming to Hollywood.
I know. How strange is that? I grew up in Chicago, and I just I loved to draw when I was a kid, but my father, I came from a very working-class family, a working-class neighborhood. We didn't know anybody who was an artist. My father didn't think anyone could make a living as an artist, so he wouldn't even allow me to take art classes in high school, even though there were like a couple of classes. But I loved to draw, so I cartooned for the school paper, and then I went to Northwestern University. I had a journalism scholarship, and I had to do a film for a commercial for a class, and I thought, I'm going to do a cartoon commercial because I draw cartoons. And that's when I got hooked on cartoons. I mean, the very first thing I did, as soon as the little character that I drew moved on the screen, I thought, oh my God, I've created life. This is a godlike thing. And so I got hooked, and I started making little films, and one thing led to another, and I was hired by Loop College to do educational films. I didn't know anybody else in animation. There was no one in Chicago. I was self-taught. And then Chuck Jones came to the Chicago Film Festival. And I went, oh my God, there's an animator. I can talk to him. And I went to see him. And I really, to this day, I can't believe that I did this, where I actually went to Suntelberg with my projector and said, I'm an animator. Look at my film. Can you believe Chuck let me in? I'm not sure anybody would do that now. But at the time, again, hands-on animation was such an odd thing. It was such a tiny, exclusive worldwide club of people who could actually animate with a pencil that Chuck said, yeah, come on in, let me see what you did. And I showed him this little film, and it was a terrible film in retrospect. But Chuck watched it, such a generous guy, and he said, I actually think you have talent. I think you could make it in Hollywood. And based on that, one sentence, Chuck Jones, I packed up my band, and off I went. And that was how I don't know, would I have ever left Chicago and gone all the way out to California if a man of the stature of Chuck Jones had not said that to me? I don't know. To this day, I don't know. All I know is what an amazing thing that he did that, and I followed his advice, and Westward Ho.
And you mentioned, okay, we're in a different world today. You may not have been able to have the sort of direct access you had with Chuck Jones at that hotel in the 70s. But at the same time, and you captured this not only when you discuss your experience with Chuck Jones in Mr. In Between, but many of the other animators that you either knew or crossed paths with one way or another, Bill. There's a generosity of spirit amongst animators. Maybe it's because it's such a particular field that regardless of what level or how many films you worked on, there's a fraternity in the best sense of the word. And Jones embodied that when he first met you that day.
It was a much stronger and more exclusive fraternity in the days of hand drawing, because the ability to hand draw an animated film is one of the most difficult things in the arts, because you not only have to be able to draw any character, but you have to draw that character perfectly, and you have to be able to turn the character dimensionally and draw them perfectly on every single frame, and then you have to make them move as if they're acting. So those three, there's a lot of people who could draw well, but those who can draw well and draw frame after frame well and then act with the drawing reduces it down to a tiny fraction of the population. But when you can do that, you have this transcendent experience of, like I said, creating life. That thrill of watching your characters come alive on paper was really nothing. There's really nothing like it. And when I came to Hollywood in '75, there was just this kind of like almost a sense across the country of young people who could do that there's going to be a chance to do it. Cal Arts had just opened a couple of years earlier, and Cal Arts had it was the first animation school in the United States, and it attracted all of these talented people like Brad Bird and John Lasseter, like Bud Light. And so we were all there for one reason. We loved animation. Nobody ever talked about making money. Nobody ever said, this is the way I'm going to make a living. This is the way I'm going to support myself. Never heard that. In those days, all of us were simply, did you look at this scene? Did you see this scene? Did you see this movie? Have you been studying what Milt Kahl did? All we talked about was the art. All we cared about was the art. Matter of fact, that's why we were such suckers, That's why you needed a union, because we would have worked for nothing.
Bill Kroyer is on the line with us. Bill Kroyer, Oscar-nominated and Annie Award-winning animator. Bill directed FernGully, The Rainforest, as well as many commercials and many Credit sequences for animated feature films. Bill's memoir, Mr. In-Between, My Life in the Middle of the Animation Revolution, is a first-person account of what may be the most important transition in the history of the arts, that being the transformation and renaissance of the animated film in the digital age. Mr. In-Between, available wherever books are sold through CRC Press, as well as Amazon.com, Bill's website, MrInBetween.org.
Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back.
One more item. If you're starting a company, particularly one that is in an emerging market, you know that averting any sort of legal dispute is crucial to your business plan. Our friends at Tectonic Law offer an array of services that can help you avoid and preempt future litigation while also developing and protecting your intellectual property and intangible assets. Tectonic Law serves the needs of a host of emerging industries throughout California and beyond, including industrial designers, beverage makers, artists, farmers, retail stores, health practitioners, wellness experts, cosmetics manufacturers, nonprofit organizations, innovators in sustainable practices, and libraries. Go to tectoniclaw.com to learn more about how Tectonic Law can help your business thrive. tectoniclaw.com. Rock solid representation for groundbreaking industries.
This portion of TV Confidential is brought to us by our friends at Front Porch Realty, the community of realtors in the Northern Bay area of California that is committed to finding the solution that is best for their clients. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or looking to sell or lease your property in Northern California, call Karen Strain at 415-886-7411 or visit frontporchrealtygroup.com for more information on how they can help you.
Hi, this is Johnny Whitaker, and you're listening to TV Confidential.
We mentioned at the top of the program, Bill's appearance on our program this week is courtesy of our mutual friend, Robert Crane. With that in mind, we said to Bill, we have two people in common other than Bob Crane. One is Steve Cannell.
Oh, really? Okay.
I didn't know him well, but I spent an hour with him about 30 years ago when I was writing my book on Rockford Files.
Oh, okay. I didn't know him well either, by the way. I mean, he was really good to us. I mean, gave us the deal for that TV show and then let us set up the company.
That show being Ultracross, an experience that Bill writes about in Mr. In-Between, and a good illustration of how the television industry works sometimes, and that Ultracross is an example of how some shows can get sold and develop, but still die in the vine for reasons beyond your control.
And then after the TV show bailed, fell apart, he let us keep the computer and let us stay in the office for rent-free for several months. So he was just great to me. I was just so thankful for his generosity.
That is the Cannell I have come to know through. I have spoken to about 4 or 5 of his lieutenants over the years, a lot more than I talked to him. And the generosity and spirit that you just described is the Steve Cannell I've gotten to know from the people who talked to him and who knew him personally. So it wasn't clear to me whether you had any actual FaceTime with him or whether you dealt. I mean, I know you dealt a lot with Jeffrey Scott while you were working on that project. It's not every day I get to talk to somebody who actually worked for Cannell.
Well, like I say, I think I literally only met him once.
Okay.
I didn't work with him at all. I worked exclusively with Jeffrey.
The other person we have in common sort of is Darren Bristow. Darren's name may not ring a bell, but I believe he still works for Nelvana. That's how I first heard of Nelvana.
Yeah, I don't know him. Did you know Glen Larson?
I never met him. I know him by reputation, both good and bad. But I know you worked on Ottoman. Yeah,
because Glen Larson and Steve Cannell were kind of the two biggest names in syndicated television at that time. They were the big guys. They had all the shows going, and they were kind of similar in their scope and, I guess their individual impact on those shows. So it was kind of ironic that I worked for both of them.
Yes, and they had a knack for knowing what the public wanted and knowing how to deliver them. And in the case of Larson had a gift for taking a project that someone else had originated and yet putting a whole new spin on it and making it marketable and popular and ultimately successful more often than not.
Yeah, he had that really unusual habit of flying to Hawaii every weekend to write, and doing so in a windowless room. So he'd fly his private jet over to Hawaii. He'd go to his beach house, and he'd go to a windowless den and never look at the beach, never look at the palm trees. And that's how he would write. That was kind of a quirky habit of his. I don't know if you know that, but the other quirky thing about that was Glen Larson always traveled in a limousine. He never drove around L.A. He always traveled exclusively in his own limo. And when he got to Hawaii, he was really upset that there were no limos in Hawaii. And so Glen Larson imported a limo. He had one sent over by ship so that when his plane landed, there was a limo waiting for him. But he only was there on weekends, right? So the limo sat there Monday through Friday, so he got this idea, why don't I just rent out the limo as a limo service, make a little extra money? Well, instantly that limo became booked 100% of the time, so he shipped 3 more limos over. And he had his own limo service as another sideline. The guy always, some people know how to make money, right? They just
No, I mean, at the end of the day, whether what he left behind is considered art or not, that's a subject for another discussion. But the man was successful, as you just said. The man knew how to make money, and the man had what Quinn Martin used to describe as the public's ass. I mean, he knew what people wanted, and he instinctively, more often than not, succeeded in delivering a product that entertained enough people that the networks would continue to buy almost anything Glen Larson had to pitch.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Is that what's that whole thing about having the innate bad taste of the American public? Is that the line they always use?
Something like that, yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's nice to have that, It's nice to be successful. I mean, you can be the other kind of guy who makes the movie that doesn't seem to go well, and then 30 years later, everybody remembers it.
Yes.
What would you prefer? I kind of prefer the latter. Ironically, that's kind of where I do sit with like FernGully and Tron, which were not huge hits when they came out, but are now have been turned into evergreens. And, I did the titles for Christmas Vacation, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, which has become another big evergreen, so it's nice to have work that I did many years ago still kind of in the public eye and still kind of being noticed and everything. So that's nice. It's nice. I kind of happy to have that.
Well, not only that, but and again, at the time you are working in your 20s and 30s in Hollywood, trying to leave I almost said trying to leave your mark, but just basically trying to make a living as an animator in a very competitive town at a time when things are changing. Your first and foremost thought is, like any artist, okay, what am I going to do next? Where am I going to go after this project ends? But when you look back at your career, as you have done and missed your in between, it's very cool, at least from a reader, it's cool to see that the story arc of your career coincides or parallels with all these changes that have gone on in the world of animation during approximately the same time you worked in that industry.
Well, that was the blessing, that was the luck, that was the good fortune, which you don't realize it at the time because you're right in the middle of it. But looking back on it I realized how coincidental it was that my career happened to just not only coincide with, but be intertwined inextricably with everything. Because I was really making the changes and using the changes. So it became it turned out to be an interesting story. I just watched that documentary Pencils to Pixels the other night. Have you seen that?
I have not.
Well, somebody did a documentary about it, and I watched it, and it was okay, It's interviews with lots of animators going from hand drawing into CG, but I mean, that was the one thing that I thought I could probably bring to mind was a very personal accounting of the journey, of and also revealing the people and the industry itself, not just the tool use, And that's the thing I tried to bring into the story was into that book was this is kind of how it felt, This is the kind of things that we were doing. This is the thing we noticed, Because an animator, from an animator's perspective, a person who doesn't understand animation won't understand the nuances and the differences and how that evolution took place, the things you had to master as an animator, and then what translated and what didn't translate when you got into as the tools changed. That's probably the interesting story, I think.
Bill Kroyer is on the line with us. Bill's memoir, Mr. In-Between, My Life in the Middle of the Animation Revolution, is a play on words. Bill began his career drawing something literally known as in-betweens. We'll ask what an in-between is in just a second. But as we mentioned before, the story arc of his 5-decade-plus career in animation happens to coincide with the many changes in the landscape of animation that have occurred in the last 5 decades, particularly the transformation and renaissance of the animated film in the digital age. Mr. In-Between, available wherever books are sold, through CRC Press as well as Amazon.com. Bill's website, MrInBetween.org. We'll talk some more with Bill after this quick timeout here in TV Confidential.
Who needs a vacation? Are you ready for an unforgettable getaway? Start packing your bags because Branson, Missouri, the vacation and entertainment capital of the U.S., is calling your name. For just $99 per person, here's what you get. A full 3-day, 2-night stay in a luxury resort hotel. A delicious full breakfast buffet every morning you're here. And when you call right now, free show tickets worth up to $100. That's right, free show tickets to an award-winning show on us. You don't have to leave the country for an amazing vacation. You can drive or fly to Branson and have an incredible time. Whether you bring in the whole family or just planning a romantic escape, this trip is built for you. We guarantee you'll love Branson. This is not a timeshare. It's just an unbeatable vacation deal for only $99 per person. You book now, you can use your tickets anytime this year. You don't even need to know your travel dates to lock in the special price. Hurry, because this offer won't last long. Call our Branson vacation experts today.
800-435-1887. 800-435-1887. 800-435-1887. That's 800-435-1887.